Yeah.
All right. Three, two, one. Welcome to the Lightforge podcast. This is Adwicta.
This is Merps. Hope you guys are doing well. Hope you guys are getting the good side of Bob and he's offering you piggies instead of getting pounded by piggies. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's going to be an all BG podcast. Apologies to those people who want to hear about Arena. Unfortunately, there just isn't much happening in the Arena this week and probably not for a while. So we're going to be talking about the actual new content and the first big content that we've seen in BG in many months.
There's going to be a patch next week, so whatever we say now may not apply in a few days, depending on how big the patch is in terms of its effect on BGs. And possibly, maybe they'll hit the button again for Arena. Probably not, but always the hope until the patch actually comes out.
Yep. All right. So let's talk about Quillboars. We previewed Quillboars last week and we broke it down in a very long podcast about what we think, how each unit is going to be, how Quillboars are going to kind of hit the meta. One thing that we stressed is Quillboars just had this very smooth progression, very smooth curve. They had independently strong tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 units, etc., etc. And that's always very powerful. Whenever you have an awkward transition or there's this big bridge that you have to gap in order to make the tribe work, that's when you get problems with it. But Quillboars had this very smooth curve. And what is the result of it? Well, they're by far the number one tribe in the game right now. If you look at HS replay, the average placement for compositions, Quillboar is by itself in tier 1, and it's not really close. So the stats right now are a little bit iffy because there was also an MMR reset. For those of you guys who don't know, MMR was pushed back to 0 for everyone. Additionally, if you were above 8K, your MMR was squeezed back to 8K. This is to prevent the rampant inflation that was going on, because if you just put everyone to 0 and at the same time keep their internal MMR, mine was like 13.5, you had people at 16K,
Mm-hmm.
then it's just a visual exercise to get back to your internal MMR and keep going. There was really nothing happening
So everyone's
under the hood
internal MMR is 8K at the start, which is
if
pretty
you were above
low.
8K.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which
very
is
low,
which is
very low.
pretty low.
Mhm.
That's not even the 1% mark. That's not even is that the 5% mark?
Um,
Uh
no, that's still like almost 1%, I think.
okay.
That's like almost 1%. Because Ixar came out with stats recently as well. I forgot exactly what they are. It's not like 5% ish. It's still quite high. I think it's close to 1%. That's why they chose that one.
I see. Okay.
So that's where we are right now. Quillboars are dominating the meta with just the highest average placement. Menagerie is coming in second. And the interesting thing is, it's not normal Menagerie. And by that, I mean the Menagerie that you all know and love with either brand or Lifang or both. And, like a Cave Hydra, a Deflectobot, etc., etc. It's Quillboar Menagerie. So
Mm-hmm.
when you see that Quillboar is number one and Quillboar Menagerie is number two, and by Quillboar Menagerie, I mean there is a Gamagan, the Great Boar, which increases all of your blood gems. There is a Charga, which plays blood gem on all friendly minions. And
Mm-hmm.
there is a Agam Thorn Curse as well, which means that every single time the blood gem is played on Agam, it gives a friendly minion of each minion type +1/+1. So all these synergies put together means tons of passive stats every single turn. And this is what HS Replay does give us. It gives us the quote typical final board for these compositions. And for Quillboars, it's a board full of Quillboars. Not that surprising. Menagerie, though, these are the typical Menagerie boards. So you see, it's really heavily geared towards Quillboar Menagerie, Brand Menagerie, and Brand in general is pretty dead. It's a little bit too slow right now, and a lot of people are frustrated at the fact that Quillboars are so powerful at the onset.
Yep. All I hear about is Quillboars dominating. I haven't played that much, but the few runs that I have played were all Quillboar dominated, and the mid game right now is just insane. Like starting at around 9 mana for like the next 2, 3 turns, maybe even 4 turns, you are just getting pounded in so hard, much more than in any previous meta that I can think of, and it's pretty hard if you're not using Quillboars yourself to be able to keep up, and usually to be able to keep up and also be leveling at the same time because you need access to bigger things. Because Quillboars don't like they still have room to grow, right? They're not the best end game comp, but they're also not like a dead end game comp like some of the other tribes where if you focus on early things. So I think just if you just focus on like surviving that mid game area, one, it's actually kind of hard without using Quillboars. Even if you like, stay at 4 and 5 is just dead, so you would try to stay on 4, but that's still pretty hard. But if you can manage to do it, it's like okay. But there's a lot of Quillboars that are going to be out competing you after you get past that. So your chances of going higher are also a little lower. And if you want to keep up, you're running a pretty significant chance of just dying as you try to go from 4 to 6.
Yeah, right now we are in a tier 4 or tier 6 meta, and tier 5, which has historically, throughout the history of BGs, been where the end game really begins. And tier 5 has always provided you with good value in terms of tempo, in terms of scaling, and that's really where the good scaling begins. And in the current Quillboar meta, tier 5 is the most barren it has ever been. There are still good units, but like I
Like the
said,
Quillboars.
yes, like the tier 5 Quillboars. Uh, and the bad thing about tier 5 right now is the tempo units are not as tempo-y as they once were because Quillboars are over tempoed. And the scaling that you get with, let's say, Light Fang is a little bit too slow. And with Brand, it's way too slow. Just way, way, way too slow. And it's reflected in the stats. Brand, if you get a brand and you play a brand, you are reducing your win rate significantly. We've never had that where you take a brand,
Mm.
you play a brand onto your board, and you tank your win rate because it is just that bad. That means
I mean,
like
that's always been the case for me, but I play really slow. And I think people are now like, if you're going to actually not go to, or if you're actually going to try to not go to 6, you have to play how slow that I played, or how conservatively that I played. And in
Mhm.
that case, you can't do Brand, or you can, but it's just not a good like choice, right? You have to like that's your choice. You don't have other good options.
So what I have personally seen, and my experience for this patch comes mostly from playing this weekend. I played a decent amount of games, and I co-casted a tournament yesterday. This was Slissa's
Hmm.
community tournament, so I got to see really high level play. These are people that have just always played BGs at the highest level and then brought their A game, brought their strats to show everyone in this tournament. So I felt like that 5 hour tournament, I supercharged my knowledge of the current meta and just interesting ways to use each unit, how to survive that mid game. But in the current meta, yeah, people are trying to get these powerful units on 4. Two standouts are Bonker, which backs up this Quillboar playstyle, giving you blood gems and that you can further use to buff Bonker and et cetera, et cetera. And Ground Shaker, actually. Ground Shaker was one that we wrote off last week. I was
Hmm.
like, oh, I just really don't see it. And it turns out that in order to survive the late game, if you're a little bit behind, or if you're just like trying to make sure you're able to get to 6, what's a good way to do it? Well, just increase the attack of everything. Go for that tie, like make sure that you always are able to kill off whatever is attacking. And because if everyone is playing Quillboars, there's not that
Yes.
much divine shields going off.
That's the
There's
big key because
yeah,
everyone is playing Quillboars, and Ground Shaker is decent against mid game Quillboars. That's kind of all it's decent against. Mid game Quillboars, mid game Pirates.
Yeah, it's great against those giant beefy things that are overstated in the mid game.
Yeah, and they can't be
So
too giant. Like demons are too big.
yeah.
So it's just those two, I think. Like possibly
Um
elementals as well. But
yeah,
like mid
no one
game
plays
elementals
elemental
is
now.
not a thing right now.
Literally no one plays elemental. If they play elemental, they die.
Yeah.
It's so bad. The only elemental that I have seen is if you're Reno and you get an early triple into a Nomi, and like Nomi elementals are still, if you get it early, right, and
Hmm.
you're able to golden it, that's good. Otherwise, elementals are just completely dead in the water right now. You can't do any sort of elementals. And it's also laughable how bad the tier 6 elementals are. Like once we see the Quillboar package, it's anyways. So people are staying on 4, grabbing these powerful units. When you level to 5, the expectation is you're going to triple into a 6 almost immediately, or it's like, okay, this is a nice stop area where I might stop for a turn, pick up some other stuff, or um, I'm just going to level to 6 immediately afterwards, because 6 is where all the good stuff is at. And especially if you're going Quillboars or Menagerie Quillboars, you want the Charoga, you want the Flat Tusk in order to just ramp up this super scaling that you have. And so tier 5 just doesn't really do it for you. If you're devoting that, let's say, 7 gold to level to or 7, 8 gold to level to tier 5, the expectation is okay, in order to make that 7, 8 gold worth it, I need to further think about, okay, now I need the 9 gold or whatever to get to tier 6. So
Hmm.
tier 5 is really just like, okay, well, I can stop here. Maybe there's some decent stuff that I can pick up. Obviously, there's Quillboar synergies there, and if I'm lucky enough to get it, that's great. But it's not worth it by itself for you to spend the gold, stay on tier 5, and just get farmed by the people who have the econ and the early tempo in order to get to 6. They pick up the Charogas, they pick up the Flat Tusks, and they just dominate you because their scaling goes up exponentially after that.
Yep. Yep. And that's like Quillboars get to 6. Last week I know I was like very down on Quillboar, not Menagerie, but like pure Quillboar's ability to like do stuff on tier 6, because I had foolishly assumed people were going to be able to get to tier 6. No one is able to get to tier 6 now, and if you do, you need to let it pay off like huge. So if you look at like win rates right now, for comps, everything's below average. Like the traditional tempo-y things are bad. Like mechs are doing absolutely horribly. Demons are doing like pretty bad. Your more late game focused things like elementals and beasts that are like a little more complicated to get going than uh like takes a couple more steps or a few more turns to get going than your like demons and mech early game stuff. They're doing just as horribly because they're not getting set up. The only thing that's working right now, well, the two things that are working right now besides Quillboars and Menagerie Quillboars, and keep in mind Quillboars and Menagerie Quillboars add up to 65% of all comps, which is ridiculous. And so the rest only have like very small percentages each. So these are players who are basically being handed these comps. So the players being handed these comps, if you are handed these comps, dragons and bullshit pirates will work. If you can get it going by basically being handed it, probably as you're pursuing Quillboars and failing.
Those combined are about 10%.
Yeah, that's a ridiculously low percentage. So you're only doing that if you're being handed them, and they still work. Is kind of where we're ending up. So yes, right? Like if you can imagine, no matter how much you try to scale your late game Quillboars, you're not going to outscale dragons with Caligos and Adina.
Nadina is the key to dragon compositions. Nadina effectively doubles the power of your entire board. So what ends up happening is Quillboars are typically bigger by themselves. They at least have a few units that are bigger by themselves than your standard dragon board. But the fact that you can get Divine Shield on everything, that is a weakness of Quillboars. Quillboars pound other compositions in the mid game and late mid game and kills off a lot of these tech units, and it kills off would-be dragon players. So if you
Hmm.
were unlucky enough to slide in and have the HP to do Caligos and Nadina stuff, you are able to have that huge advantage because yes, there is like Bristleback, yes, there's Tough Tusk, but Quillboars don't have that much divine shields. They just have tons of big stuff, a lot of big stats, and a couple of like mid-sized units if they have like a Charlga, if they have a Gamagan. But most of the time they'll have like big Bonker, uh, big Bristleback, and one or two big like giant dynamic duos. So yeah, like divine shield on everything is a very good counter to Quillboars, but Quillboars are really good at nipping those in the
Hmm.
bud early on.
Yeah, like this isn't to say do dragons. Do not do dragons. Dragons are horrible, as they've kind of generally been since they got toned down a long time back. But if you do get to the Caligos and you have a dragon or two on your board, and you have like enough health to take a hit or two, then you can overcome Quillboars and win the whole lobby, right? Dragons are always like feast or famine. Um, and with as far as HS replay stats go, they're not considering anything before that to be dragons because you're not dragons. You're not dragons until you have some dragons, and no one just like lets a bunch of tier 4 or 5 dragons hang out in their comp for no reason.
Yep, that doesn't work right now. So let's talk about Quillboars and what you should do in this current meta. Like, how
Hmm.
should you play it?
Hmm.
We're gonna go beyond the buy Quillboars forehead analysis. That
Let's start with the first thing. My first question is, which Quillboars do you not get if you are not like, let's say you're not Menagerie, because the Menagerie ones are obvious and they're all good. Like for
um
Menagerie, which other regular Quillboar stuff would you not buy, even though you are going for Quillboars and Quillboars are OP?
I mean, as of right now, it's so tightly synergized. I would not say to actively avoid any Quillboar. I'm just gonna talk about a couple of units that maybe people keep for a little bit too long. How about
Okay,
that?
yep, that works.
I think that that's safe.
Hmm.
One of the things that I see people perhaps keep too long and also devote a little bit too much resources in is road bore. People are getting a little bit excited when they see Quillboars. Road bore is, remember, the tier 2 2/4 Quillboar that frenzies gain a blood gem. This is one of those minions in which you don't want to put all of your blood gems into this every single turn. You always want to save like one or two blood gems in your hand just because sometimes you need it to activate like a tough tusk that you pick up, or you just want to buff something else that's actually relevant. And I also see people, really wanting to continue the blood gem generation. So they just keep this road bore way, way, way too long, which is probably which is very detrimental. Just because this is not a powerful unit. Yeah, you can
Hmm.
generate blood gems, but blood gem generation is not everything.
And
So
you have
just
better
really
unit
watch
later
that.
on to generate your blood gems.
Hmm.
Like this is like if you had a micro, not a micro machine, I'm forgetting it, micro mummy, the 1 mana mech, and you're like, oh, but it'll trigger my the Deflectotron or whatever. What is that thing called? Deflecto?
What
The
Deflectobot?
yeah, Deflectobot. Yeah, it'll trigger my Deflectobot later, which it will. But as a mech player, you know not to put all your resources or even a lot of resources into your micro mummies. It's the same thing here. You don't want it'll eventually be replaced if you are actually doing the comp, because there will eventually be things like egg, for example, that will just be so much better than your micro mummy is going to get.
Um, in the same vein, you want to watch out for overkeeping Thorncaller, which is the tier 3, 4/3 Quillboar, Battlecry, and Death Rattle gain a blood gem, as well as the tier 2 Prophet of the Boar, tier 2, 3/3, once per turn after you play a Quillboar, gain a blood gem. As you can see, these are just consistent ways for you to gain blood gems, but what I see people do is because they want to be greedy for blood gems, they keep these on the board a little bit too long. And what you're really doing is keeping a 3/3 or like a 4/3 on your board for way too long, and you're taking way too much damage just for a single blood gem. So the question that you really want to be asking, and the way you want to be phrasing it, is like, do I want a blood gem for, on average, like 3 extra damage, 4 extra damage? And people right now, it's hard for them to see it, but they will slowly be able to see it. And yeah, I understand it makes people happy. Just like after the turn ends, they have like 6 blood gems in their hand. They're like, oh, this is awesome. But in a Quillboar meta, if you are trying to get to the higher tiers, um, like being able to properly preserve HP, play for tempo, right? Getting the space to get to tier 6 or going to tier 5 with like 2 triples or something, and then doing that, that's so much more beneficial. When you are getting these blood gems with these units I'm talking about, tier 2, tier 3 units, blood gems are not worth as much because blood gems are super good once you get like everything running, right? You get the whole machine working with the tier 5 boar, Charlga, the Agam Thorn Curse as well. That's when you get everything like super duper scaling. So don't keep those units for too long. Buy them. Don't get attached to them, because I do see people get a little bit too attached to them, and I think people don't even notice. Like they keep it for 1 turn longer, and they're like, okay, now I can get out of it. Meanwhile, you just took 14 damage, and you could have just taken like 7 damage, and that 7 HP, that might have been the difference. A lot of times, it is the difference between you being able to find the end game scaling and you just dying in like 6th place.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That totally makes sense.
So
Um,
yeah, these are still good units. Like I would take them, but like with other units that I think don't generate things, and people are just like, oh yeah, I'm done. I
mhm.
can upgrade to a better tempo unit. Like I see this egg, right, and they're like, oh, I'll take this egg. It's good tempo. People get really attached to something that gives them like a single blood gem, and not worth it. Like
Yep.
you want to be able to recognize when it still is worth it and when it isn't worth it. And you're like, man, I'm upgrading a 3/3 to an 8/8 on this turn, and that could be the difference between um, quite a lot of damage. Like damage management and risk mitigation right now, super duper important. It's not just about how many blood gems you can play per turn. It's about giving yourself space to get to tier 6.
Yep. Okay. So my question is, how long do you keep Tough Tusk?
I would say you keep Tough Tusk for as long as you're able to, properly put blood gems on it.
So Tough Tusk is an actual end game, even if you're on tier 6, like tier 6 Quillboars. Tough Tusk still has a place in your comp.
Uh, Potentially,
Like
yes.
if you've
Like
been like
yeah,
upgrading it,
potentially,
right?
yeah,
Like if you've had it early, you've been upgrading it, not like buy
yeah.
one.
Yeah. I would say right now the strongest slash like okay, the best unit in the game, and this is caveat by like I'm obviously not going to say like, oh, it's a Malgadon, right? Or it's Charlga or something. It's like the best bang for your buck in terms of when you get it and everything. It's Bannerboar right now. Bannerboar is
Hmm.
absolutely insane because it is an overstated Iron Sensei that you can direct where the buff goes. And as we've seen from all of these Blood Gem interactions, if you get certain units, which is actually most of the Quillboars, a blood gem is more than just a passive +1/+1.
Yep.
It either gives divine shield, or let's say with the bristleback brute, it gives an extra 3/3, right? So banner boar for when you find it and the effect, because like if you have banner boar, you have a chance of getting the brute. You have tough tusk. You can quote settle with a road boar, and just keep on generating blood gems like that. Banner Boar is one of those things that allows you to keep Tough Tusk super easily, because Tough Tusk is one that you want to put to the side of Banner Boar, and you don't even have to generate blood gems to put it on Tough Tusk. It'll just gain Divine Shield every single turn. So, um, And of course, after you golden Tough Tusk, which it's a tier 2, and I know everyone's playing Quillboars, but it's not the hardest thing to golden. It gains Divine Shield permanently after you blood gem it. So it just becomes a permanent Divine Shield unit. So yeah, I would say Tough Tusk is in a decent amount of endgame comps.
Okay. That will make it. Is there anything else on tier 2 that isn't any endgame comp? Like demons have Pink Man, right, to start with, but outside of that, I guess Murlocs keep stuff just because they
Yeah,
are
Murlocs
Murlocs,
keep
but they're
everything.
not like the identity of the unit, right? Like Murlocs don't do anything. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't exactly say Tough Tusk is like the identity of Quillboars as well, but yeah, I
no,
mean,
I
we
mean
have
like they don't. The Murlocs don't have an identity. Like each Murloc, right? They have no text. Their text is
right.
all like battle cry,
Um,
whatever.
I mean, in terms of power that stays into the late game, I
Mm-hmm.
would say probably the most powerful and the most the best example is the red whelp for dragons actually.
Mm.
Because what ends up happening is you scale everything, and if things go right,
Right.
and especially if you like tripled a red whelp, it doesn't even have to be triple. If you just like buffed it with Calgos and everything, red whelps are super duper clutch. Like I know it's random, but
Mm-hmm.
that one shot, or a lot of times like two shots, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get rid of a divine shield, you kill off a reset immediately. For scam comps, like if dragons are facing scam comps, red whelps just actually destroy scam comps. So like, um, yeah, I wouldn't say like the tough tusk thing is unprecedented or
Okay.
anything. It does make it feel worse, right? It's like, oh, of course, they have a tier 2 unit that you also bring into the late game and it has a lot of applicability. But with basically every comp, I don't think this is like crazy here.
Yeah, I think the difference between that and Red Whelp, and what makes it more like Pink Man, is that it's good immediately and it stays good throughout. With Red
Mhm.
Whelp, there's always that valley period where you're like, "What am I doing with this unit?" Right, and then you hit the Caligos and you're like, "Great," or you don't, and you're like, "Well, I've been dragging this unit on my team for like 2 3 turns at this point, where I would have replaced it, should have replaced it."
Yeah, Tough Tusk is much easier of a keep in
Hmm.
the uh, murky mid game. It's definitely stronger there. Whereas, yeah, the whelp, it's a tougher keep during that time. It might just be like the play, like you're not really
Yeah.
replacing it with anything decent. But yeah, Tough Tusk definitely provides more of that like beefy tempo that you really want in the mid game. So that's where sorry, that's where we're at with Tough Tusk. And let's talk about how you play in this Quillboar meta. Like it's
Hmm.
great if you get like, lucky enough to get the banner boar and then you level to 4 and you get bonker right away and you're just like, all right, GG, great. Um, but what are the certain skills that you need and certain nuanced things that you might need to just consistently gain a little bit more MMR than you perhaps may have been getting? And I think the number one skill right now is to recognize whenever you are getting out quill board. I think one mistake that people make, and this is something that I learned in the tournament, and I saw people sometimes adjusting very well, sometimes maybe not so much. Um, this is one of those situations where it's like, and we had this in the demon meta as well. This is a long time ago, so people might not remember. If within the demon meta, if your if you start off a little bit later, or you just got unlucky, right? But you were behind with your Wrath Weavers compared to like the other like two of the other demon players in the lobby, you had to adjust unless Bob gives you a god shop in the next time you're back at the tavern. You have to adjust somehow. You have to basically just think like, okay, well, that's not really working. Like if things just play out on average, or if I'm even just a bit lucky, that doesn't work for me. I'm going to get enveloped by their superior stats. So similar to how it was in the demon meta, it is the same for Quillboars. Once again, Quillboars don't have that much divine shields. All of it is just big, beefy, giant minions. If in the mid game you see I'm behind, like um, it's hard to it's hard for me to just tell you like, oh, okay, well, just pivot, right? Just pivot to something else. And a lot of times you can't exactly pivot, but what you might want to do is, okay, Murlocs are in the game. You can pick up like a Toxfin. Maybe you don't even have a Murloc yet. Let's do some of that, right? It might not cause you to win the exact next game against Quillboars, but maybe you don't die. And then you can also perhaps pick up a selfless. You can perhaps stay on tier 4 just a little bit longer to collect yourself to get stronger. Because if you didn't recognize this and you were trying to compete with these Quillboar compositions that are already ahead of you, and it's like they level to 5, I level to 5, they level to 6, I level to 6, you lose unless Bob just gives you God shops. And I think this is one of those skills that people will pick up. And is it still going to be frustrating facing Quillboars? Yes, it's still going to be frustrating, but there are ways to mitigate this, to salvage like a 4th instead of a 6, and for you to, just climb a little bit more than you have been. Because I see some people just jamming Quillboars when they are behind, and due to the nature of Quillboars, that is the worst thing for you to do.
Yeah. So, I mean, sometimes Quillboars are not the answer, not because they're not by far the best, but just because Bob is being bad to you. And there's a line, right, in every meta. And in this meta, it's early, right? It's early, and Quillboars are very powerful. So people are going to take a little bit of time to learn how to find it. I have a question about this because you've watched and commentated on and casted that whole tournament. How fun is this current Quillboar meta to watch? Let's
You
let's put it
know,
in a watching, in a spectator frame first before we talk about playing.
watching, I think it's pretty fun. Because, well, first of all, if you're watching on Twitch and you're watching streamers, that a lot of there's a lot of entertainment in just laughing at whatever happens to whichever streamer you're watching. So, you want good stuff to happen and you want bad stuff to happen. The worst is if kind of nothing happens, right? That's the worst thing. And what Quillboars have as a pro in terms of entertainment, number one, there's lots of stuff to do, which I know you hate.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of blood gems you got to play. There's positioning considerations. There are just like interactions which people haven't really internalized yet. It's like, okay, wait, I have a tier 5 boar. I also have a Chargo. I also have this. I have that. It's like how many blood gems are going on? Like, you're trying to do this all this calculations in your head. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's satisfying, I guess, playing blood gems. If you have like a golden bonker, just getting freaking 8 blood gems in one round of attacks. So I think it's fairly entertaining. The people who are playing it are obviously a little bit frustrated. I played BGs a decent amount last night, like quite a few hours, just to make sure I knew what I was talking about, to experience it in person as well. There have definitely been times where I have been frustrated in which I thought I was quite strong, and I was, but Quillboars, man, they just like nothing out tempos them in the mid game. And even when I had good Quillboars, people had better Quillboars. And with Quillboars, the unfortunate thing is because, like if you're just a little bit bigger than your opponent, you have the opportunity to deal massive amounts of damage due to, everything being left there. And Yeah, it's definitely a little bit frustrating at times, but I'm still having fun. It's new, and I think this is something that we kind of expect. If Blizzard's going to come out with something, I think they would rather err on the side of it being a little bit too powerful than being underpowered, which is exactly what happens when Dragons first came out. If you remember, Dragons first came
Mm-hmm.
out, everyone was super hyped for Dragons, and they sucked. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
good at all. Like they were just really bad. Calagos was a 2.8, I believe. I
Oh, I
think it
thought he
was
was
like a
a two
two.
six, but yes, very
I think it
crappy.
was a 2.8. Yeah. Twilight Emissary was a tier 5. And that was one of the problems as well. Twilight Emissary was a tier 5. So you didn't have any of this mid game buffs or scaling at all. It was just really bad. And people are frustrated, but I think this is fine as long as they start doing some tweaks soon-ish. It'll be okay. But overall, like for the fun factor versus my expectations, it's been good. Like, it has been fun as a viewer and playing it. Will it continue this way if they don't fix it? No, of course not. Like, it is problematic, but I think we're all okay with it being problematic for a short period of time, uh, as long as they swoop in and implement some changes ASAP.
Mm-hmm. So, what would you change right now if you had to make just one or two changes, like to nerf two
Only one or
cards?
two?
Yeah,
I
only one
have
or two,
so
or
many.
would you nerf like all everything?
I've talked about this in our Discord. Oh, by the way, if you're interested, we have a Grinning Goat Discord. You should join it. I'm very active. Adulta doesn't know it exists, so
I have a wife. She keeps me up to date on only the most important things, and
yes,
like what we name our Pokemon discussion channel.
yeah, it's very important. But let me talk about some changes that I think are very, very necessary. They start with the lower tier units and then we can go higher. But changes to the lower tier units are much more impactful, right? We want to limit the independently strong potential of these earlier units, such that when you do get these late game units, like the tier 5 boar, you're not just like, oh, of course I'm going to take this. Like
Mm.
I was already heavily incentivized to take all of these previous Quillboars. So yeah, this is great. Um, Tough Tusk needs to be nerfed by at least one stat. My suggestion for Tough Tusk is instead of a 4-3 to be a 4-2. People have pitched 3-3, but I think that health in the early game is much more important, right? There's 2 is like a huge break point at the beginning, where you have a lot of taunts that have like 2 attack or 3 attack, but like you're exposing it to all the 2 attack things, right?
Hmm.
Acolyte of Cthulhu, the molten rock. Also a lot of tokens and small things like Elemental and the Murloc token, the Tide Hunter. They have 2 attack as well. I think that will go very well with it because like, and it's more in line with what Tough Tusk is about. It's like, oh, if you have a blood gem, you can put a divine shield on it, right? So it keeps the attack, and it's like it keeps that flavor of it. Oh, being like an aggressive divine shield unit, if you can put the blood gem on it. But I want it to be weaker independently, and
Hmm.
perhaps the person who looks at it is might still take it, but now instead of dealing damage or tying, they're losing. So I think that's important first of all. Prophet of the Boar, I think could also use a nerf of one stat. So instead of being the tier 2/3/3, my suggestion would be a 2/3. Just weaken it a little bit.
Really,
Um,
Prophet of the Boar?
yeah, I think these are things that are just a little bit too universally good, you know? Like a tier 2/3/3. Because once you gain a blood gem, you already make it up, right? I
Hmm.
don't see why they would incentivize you to just be like, oh, take this, and it's already like a fine 2.
Hmm.
Um, so because after you take this, the first Quillboar you take, uh, you're gonna gain +1/+1,
But isn't
right?
that a
So
smaller condition than Road Boar?
Road
At least
Boar,
in the early game, I mean.
yeah, like Road Boar, I think because the way I want to think about it is I don't want to nerf all of them, and I would rather keep Road Boar. I think Road Boar is fine. And it's kind of, I don't see Road Boar as being that problematic. And I like the stat distribution. So when we're talking about these nerfs, I'm going to be targeting Tough Tusk, which I think is
Yeah,
the most
yeah.
problematic,
I mean,
and then also Prophet of the Boar, which I think is just a little bit too over, like tiny bit too overtuned. And
so
Road Boar, I'm going to keep as is.
so in tier two, would you say Prophet of the Boar is better than Road Boar right now?
Um,
Like for when
they're
you just hit tier two, right? I'm
they're
not talking about.
about this. Not like, yeah, I think Prophet of the Boar is good because like Road Boar, you could not get a blood gem pretty soon.
Right.
Actually, you
I mean,
could.
Prophet of the Boar, you won't get a blood jet until a couple turns after, like depending, because you're
Well,
also conditional. You have to take a Quillboar.
Yeah, but you're like just taking Quillboars anyways.
Yeah, but
So
not on the turn that you get them, right? Like you may not have an extra
you may
roll or
not,
extra
or
like
you may. Yeah. So I think Prophet of the Boar.
yeah.
Um,
Because in the early game, in order to get Prophet of the Boar and another Quillboar, you need at least like 6 mana
yeah.
available in order to
Mhm.
do it, and you have to be offered Prophet of the Boar and another Quillboar, right? Which is like that's not going to happen. I mean, it's not a rare occurrence, but it's not a majority occurrence when you
Yep.
see Prophet of the Boar.
I do. The thing I like about Road Boar and the mechanic behind it is, it does reward kind of consider like I would rather nerf something that takes like very like less consideration, right? Prophet of the Boar is like, do I buy slash play a Quillboar or do I not, right? Meanwhile, with Road Boar, you're introducing this thing. It's like, well, maybe I buff it a couple of times in order to just get like,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes me stronger. Plus, I get a blood gem, and if I'm using a blood gem on, like, there's this extra consideration. And there's quite a few times in which in the game, I am thinking, I'm like, okay, I have these 3 blood gems, and do I use one, two, on the Road Boar, maybe even 3? Like, what turn am I on? Like, what are taunts typically? Like what attack do taunts typically have right now? I'm facing Murlocs, which means the attack might actually be very high right now. Like, I'd rather keep Roadbore as it is because I think there's much extra consideration with Roadbore than with Prophet of the Boar, in which is like, oh, like pig good, buy pig, play pig
Hmm.
kind of bit. So
Okay.
yeah, I like the way that Roadbore forces you to at least consider these things. Meanwhile, Prophet is just like, bleh.
Okay, so you just like the design of Road Boar better.
Yeah. Mhm.
But
So
would you agree with me in saying that Road Boar is more powerful in the turns that you would buy a tier 2 unit than Prophet of the Boar?
I would say Roadbore is more powerful on turn 3 and 4, and then Prophet is a little bit
Yes.
better on like it's on like turn 4, 5, 6 ish. Approximately.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Now, what would you think about just removing Prophet of the Boar from the game?
I'd be fine with it. I don't really care too much. I think they
Because
have like
one thing
play.
that struck me is
I don't
how
care.
easy it is to generate blood gems. All
Yeah,
right,
it's very
like
easy.
it's super easy to generate blood gems. So if we're gonna keep all these blood gem generators out, like if you look at it, there's both units on tier 1 generate blood gems if you're in desperate need of them. One of them is you effectively spend 2 mana to get 2 blood gems, which is a pretty fair buff thing. Um, and then you get blood gems from Roadboar 2. Then you get to tier 3, and you get 2 blood gems per turn from Bannerboar, and then likely 2 blood gems on the first turn from Thorncaller, and then one more blood gem every. Like, there's just a lot of blood gem generation going on, even in the very early going.
Yeah. No, I'm fine with Prophet of the Boar and leaving if we choose to go in that direction. I'm fine with it because once again, it, it doesn't have like that much interesting decisions,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like buy slash play boar or no buy slash play boar.
And it's a
Uh,
not a unique interaction because a lot of other things is buy this and then something happens, right? Like this happens with
yeah, yeah,
elementals, this happens with pirates.
yeah. Um, and we should be creating more stuff like road boar. Like I'm not exactly saying like cool boar, but like I think road boar and the amount of stuff you have to at least consider, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a plus. I like that. I want to reward um that sort of thought process there. Also, okay, for
Next
tier
nerf.
yeah, next nerf, banner boar has to be nerfed.
Yeah, yeah.
So good. Like, okay, once again, people are talking about bonker, but pound for pound, like where you get it versus its impact on the game. Like, I am strongly of the belief that like banner boar is just like that is breaking the game right now. When you think about Quillboars and you think like what is really causing this plague of pigs,
Mm-hmm.
it's banner
Yep.
boar. Sometimes you get bonker, sometimes you don't, but you do get that a little bit later. And the people that bought Quillboars at the beginning, which everyone does, like Tough Tusk is a 4-3. Are you going to take a 4-3 tier 2? Sure. It doesn't even matter, right? You take
Mm-hmm.
that. And then but once you pick up Banner Boar, you get too much stats for where it is. And this thing should not be a 2-5 as well. It just shouldn't. So if you want to keep that interaction, which I think is okay if you, because people are like, no, 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 like you have to change that ability. Well, if you just change people's incentives to pick up Quillboars at the beginning, it already
Mhm.
suddenly nerfs that, right? Because now people maybe don't pick like the profit, or they don't pick the tough tusk at the beginning.
And
So that changes.
these are just mathematically problematic cards. Like we looked through them and we immediately identified Tough Tusk was ridiculous, always going to be ridiculous for the mid game, and also
Yeah.
Bannerbore, and those are the two most problematic cards in allowing Quillboars to do what they do. Like I totally agree with you that the focus should be on 2 and 3 in terms of the
Mhm.
problematic tiers, because that's what sets you up. When I start having trouble on like turn 7, 8, 9, 10, if I get there, most of that is not because the tier 4 units are coming in and doing a lot of damage. Tier 4 units may exist, but they're just getting online. Like they don't hit their real like power spike until a couple turns after that they exist. On the other hand, the tier 3 units are doing a lot of damage. And the tier 2 units as well. So not just Bannerbore. Bannerbore obviously is a problem throughout the entire game, but Bristleback Brute as well. Like it literally takes the turn you buy a Bristleback Brood, you may already have a Blood Gem, and then boom, you have a 7/7 tier 3 unit.
Mhm.
Like that should have been like, what's a normal tier 3 unit? Like a 4/5, so it should have been like a 5/6. Instead, you have a 7/7.
Yeah, it's way too good. If you want to keep the effect, which I think is okay as long as you eliminate the ridiculous incentives for people to pick up Quillboars, like on tier 2, this thing can't be a 2/5. Uh, Make it a 2/2, make it a 2/3. I think a 2/3 is like fine-ish, to not just nerf it a little bit too much. But a 2/5 is stupid. 2/5 means it is not like it's always, almost always able to get 2 hits in whenever you get it. When everyone is first going to tier 3.
Yeah, like
So
is
that,
Iron Sensei problematic?
no, Iron Sensei isn't
Like, so
problematic.
why? This is really my
Uh,
question. Iron Sensei seems like a fine card designed with a decent power level for where it is, doing like normal stuff. No one's complaining about it. No one's like, this is a useless card. Like, sure, maybe make it a little better than Iron Sensei, because you have to split, right? And you need 2 Quillboars, but you do get to pick where it is. Like, these things balance out kind of. But why a 2/5 over a 2/2 or somewhere, a couple points above a 2/2? This is
mhm.
just, it's silly. It's always been silly.
Yes. So then, after Bannerbore, I think Thorncaller is okay.
Would,
If we get to,
would you Bristleback Brute? Would you make any changes in that? Because that's the one that gets big real quick in that mid game area.
it
Like,
gets big very quickly, but you do have to kind of like. I would like to keep Brute the way it is. So I'm looking for ways to nerf other things rather than nerf Brute. You can just nerf it to, let's say, initially a 2/3,
right?
maybe. I think that's fine. But like, I like what it does, and I like kind of the how it enables like swaps, right? Like Brute is one of those things where it's like, oh, I can put a lot of blood gems on it, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
a really good swap target. And sure, you can say, well, they have like good swap targets anyways. But this is one of those where like you can really start to plan for the future while still getting some stats right now. So I think Brute is like okay. I'd prefer to keep that one the way it is, because I don't see it as problematic as Banner. Well, basically nothing is as problematic as
Yeah,
Bannerbore.
yeah,
Bannerbore is stupid. Yeah,
yeah.
Bannerbore is actually stupid. Um, and then also, uh, I can talk about nerfs and potential changes for days, but let's just go through a final one that I think is quite necessary. And it's the one that everyone's talking about. It's Bonker. Bonker on tier 4. It's a 4/7 Quillboar. It has Wind Fury. After this attacks, gain a Blood Gem. The crazy thing about Bonker is when it's gold, it has Mega Wind Fury, and after it attacks, it gains 2 Blood Gems. It's like the best gold version of
Mm.
a card ever, except for maybe what Murzond. Murzond is like crazier, right? But that's really stupid because it's much harder to get because Murzond you're not keeping on your board, so it's like you have to luck into getting a golden Murzond. Bonker is something you actually keep on your board. I think with this, if we are nerfing the lower tiers already, once you get to Bonker, you don't have to go crazy here, but just something as easy as turning it from a 4-7 to a 4-6. Now it might not be able to attack as many times,
I mean,
might die
that's
hit.
huge.
That's already huge, right?
That's huge
Uh,
because it's a Wind Fury unit with an ability tied to attacking. Like,
yes.
removing any amount of health is ridiculously huge for this unit.
Yep. So, Bonker is one that I think some people want to nerf into the ground. I like the flavor behind it. I think it's a cool card. It's just a little bit too powerful right now because of the reasons that we've stated before. So yeah, like this is what you want to focus on. Like tier 2 right now is a little bit too good. Tier 3 is way too good with like the banner boar. And tier 4 bonker is just a little bit problematic. It's capable potentially, and this is one of the problems with it, right? Like it could just get hit
Mhm.
and then produce nothing. Or it could produce a lot of blood gems. So it's got that swing,
Yeah.
but let's temper it a little bit. As long as you're nerfing the previous tiers, nerfing Bonker by 1 HP should be enough. So it doesn't have to be the changes we talked about before, specifically with like, let's say the Prophet and Tough Tusk, Bannerboard, etc. But nerf the earlier tiers and Bonker just nick it a little bit, take away that 1 HP, and the whole entire tribe will be just a lot healthier.
Yeah, I don't think reducing bonkers by 1 HP is a nick. That is a huge nerf to a card like this. Like,
Mhm.
not to say it'll make it unplayable at all, but it'll make it so you have to have a much more future outlook, which is a fair enough trade off because your other two units, Dynamic Duo and Ground Shaker, take up the other opposite ends of the spectrum. Dynamic Duo being tempo immediately, and Ground Shaker being potential like survival in the mid game if you need it, like a utility card almost, right? So Bonker is setting up that potential late game um, uh, prize. It's fitting for what they're trying to do in tier 6 with these cards.
Yep. I also see people wanting to nerf dynamic duel potentially, and this is once again just a difference in game design, kind of philosophy. Whereas if something is really powerful and I want to bring them down in power, what I don't want to do if they're powerful right now with variants and some variants, I want to bring them down and I want them to keep some stable
Mm-hmm.
power because that is going to be less problematic and also easier for me as a game designer to kind of control, right? So when I look at something like dynamic duel, I'm just like, okay, is this very powerful right now given the current meta? Yes, it's very powerful, right? But would I rather kind of nerf bonker than something like dynamic duo, which is like very, it's a stable kind of just stats, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're getting a lot of stats. I think I want to change other stuff like bonker before I change something like dynamic duo. And if I can change stuff before then, I like rewarding people with picking something up like a dynamic duo. I don't think there's anything wrong with going to tier 4 or tripling into tier 4, finding dynamic duo, being very happy that you got this like scaling unit, um, uh, knowing that you sacrificed something or took some risk in order to go full Quillboar.
Yeah.
That's the thing. That's
Uh,
the most important thing.
You have to be rewarded for choices, right? You can't just have everything like kind of not matter. And if you were the thing with dynamic duo is you need one another Quillboar and two a blood gem generator, or you have to commit resources to buying stuff like tier 1 units that give you blood gems or whatever, right? So it requires quite a bit of commitment to do stuff, even more so than the pirate guy. And remember, you need another Quillboar, and that other Quillboar has to be buffed. So it can't just be a regular Quillboar, or you're not getting the full value out of your +1/+1 blood gem buffs. Dynamic Duo is quite sensitive to how good Quillboars are. When you make Quillboars worse and you nerf any other aspect of Quillboars, especially this early mid-game Quillboars like we're discussing here, like even a little bit, Dynamic Duel is going to feel it because you're going to have fewer blood gems. You're going to have fewer targets for blood gems, potentially also, even when you're going Quillboars. And you're going to go Quillboars less often. So that's not true of something like Bonkers. It is also true of something like Thorncaller, not Thorncaller, Bannerboar. But Bannerboar is just so ridiculous in all sorts of ways.
Yeah. So that's where we're at with the potential nerfs. Um, I, I think some people might be surprised that you don't need a ton of big changes. And if you are to change something, let's not immediately change the cool end game stuff, right? Like let's
Yeah,
keep those.
yeah,
Cool end game stuff is cool. And the important thing in game design is rewarding people for good play, taking risks in order to get to this cool stuff. And the cool stuff is even cooler when you're just like, oh man, like I was able to survive, make good decisions, and then get to this stuff, and I'm rewarded for it. And now, like there's fireworks, and I'm gonna get to, I'm gonna be in top two, potentially like number one. That feels good. Like that is a good thing, and we should reward that with very powerful units. Now, you don't want like stuff that is too powerful or kind of just makes the end game unfun, like Holy Mackerel
oh my god, freaking holy
Un-
mackerel.
or Alistra did. Like, and you can
Oh
see the problems with both of these cars and how they made the end game
yeah, Quillboars don't
unfun.
have that problem.
No, they don't have that problem. In fact, the end game is very fun, whether it's Flat Tusk or whether it's Charlga. People like all of these stats. People like being able to do this stuff. So let's not nerf that. Like
Yeah.
that's fun, but right now it's too easy to get there, and you haven't paid enough of a price to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is one of the things that has always like Caligos has always been you paid the price to get the Caligos, right? Like you took some
Yep.
damage. You could have also just gotten really lucky, but whatever. We don't count
You
that.
took 2 turns of damage.
Yeah, you took some damage, and then also, do you not have dragons like in your comp? Because if you don't, that's really bad. It's not even in this meta, like any meta, right? Like if you just took Caligos and you didn't have any dragons, you were probably just dead anyways before you got online. So getting Caligos and being, that fun dragon buffing board, and everyone likes dragons because they're cool and everything. There was a reward for risk and doing all of that stuff, and that's really the problem. Like appropriately, like sort of like making players do this risk instead of just buying up all the boars and then giving the reward. The reward ends up not being as fun, and it, it it makes people frustrated at all the stuff as well. So
Yeah.
I would not touch the tier 6 at all. You can talk about changing the tier 5 stuff. I don't think that's really necessary. But you change a tier 2 to tier 4 units. Also, people have been talking about like Sun Bacon Relaxer and how it's too good, and it gives like 2 blood gems in
Mhm.
the late game as well. Once again, if you cut the problem at like the lower stem or the roots, it makes all of these things like Sun Bacon Relaxer, these tier 5, tier 6 things worse as well. So let's cut out like the actual meat, how they get there. And then I'm not saying we never change tier 6 or Sun Bacon Relaxer, but change the risk that it takes to get to these things before you change the actual fun stuff.
Yeah, and if anything, this is an argument that I know Merps has been making a lot, but I'm also fully on board with, which is you got to make tier 6 better for a lot of the tribes to keep up. Like, the focus is on elementals, but really, a lot of the tribes have irrelevant or nearly irrelevant tier 6 units. Not as bad as elementals, but this is. And the only reason the Pirates one is at all keeping up is because of the scam comp, which is, like, weird and probably shouldn't exist, and fucking Khadgar needs to leave. But once you get rid of Khadgar, you're going to see that more tier 6 units, right? The Admiral is also just kind of like an okay like unit, and those all need to be buffed a little to keep up. They don't have to be Caligos Nadino level, but because dragons are end game and they don't have a lot of support in mid game, but they have to be a bit better than they are. I think right now, if you're sensing a problem with Quillboar's end game, it's not like part of it is that everyone's going Quillboar, so you're getting there. Whoever gets there first wins, right? You don't have any alternatives, but you can get alternatives if other classes can keep up. We are the first people to say nerf, don't buff. We are the people that are the most worried about things becoming overpowered past their structural fundamentals of any game system, and we think there exists. You can't just buff everything, make everything OP, and have it actually be balanced. You're affecting swing, like at its base. And the game can take a certain amount of swing is needed, and a certain amount of swing is too much. But we're not in that problem here with Quillboars. Like Quillboars isn't pushing the boundaries of swing in the end game. The Quillboars' main problem is that early, not even early, but like the mid game, like the mid game. It's just too dominant, and that's what makes the end game seem more dominant than it is. And really, honestly, the game wasn't balanced for tier 6 units even before Quillboars came along, and that has nothing to do with Quillboars, and that needs to be addressed in some other way. Like think like I don't know, demons, elementals, pirates without Khadgar. Just there's a gap.
Yeah, one of the main problems that BG has always had is the lack of levers that you can pull. And you can look at it and say, well, there's other auto battlers out there. But BG tries to keep it very simple. And with the tier system, there's only 6 tiers. The cost to level up is whatever it is right now. There it's hard. They try to Hearthstone has always had this philosophy of keep things simple, and if things are not smooth eh, to some capacity, it's fine because the simplicity is going to be really good at getting people to play, keeping people in, and we want people to, really enjoy the simplicity of it. So I respect that. Like I get it, but yeah, you do have this like problem. And with a game like BG's in which you don't have this many levers, but at the same time, the meta is like balancing it's balancing on a string, right? It's really tough. And you have all of these units, you have all of these heroes. Um, Making big changes, is always going to be um awkward. It's always going to be awkward. So we can talk about these changes to like certain tribes, and they're like easier. But when we talk about, let's say, a quote tier 6 problem, that is a lot tougher, just from the way that Blizzard has made the game. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like there's some
Mm-hmm.
pros to this quote problem, and this quote problem has probably drawn a lot of people in to play it because it's much easier to explain to your friend. It's like, oh, what are you playing? Battlegrounds. Oh, can you explain to me in 30 seconds? Yeah, you actually can. And some games you can't do that, right? Some games there's no way. You're just like, oh, it's weird. Um, but yeah, this is one of those problems that's existed for a while that we can call it a problem, and not every problem needs a solution, but it's still a problem.
Yep. Any other words on Quillboars or BGs before we leave the topic?
No, I think that's it. I think this was a good conversation. Yesterday was very eye-opening for me. I learned a ton watching all of the competitors. So thank you to Slissa for inviting me on, and also thank you to all the competitors yesterday who entered
Mm-hmm.
her community tournament. It was an extremely good showing, and I think it was the first example in this meta where you really saw, okay, how do people deal with Quillboars? How do they beat the meta? If you haven't watched it, I urge you to go to her VODs and watch it if you want to improve in BGs for this meta, which they might change. It's just so many historically elite players coming together and bringing their absolute A game. So that was super duper cool. I learned a lot. And I think this is just sort of what we need to really understand the meta, because
Yeah.
the first few days, also people were thinking the meta was a certain way. And this isn't just like, oh, Quillboars then, Quillboars now. The meta has definitely shifted throughout the week. And it's interesting to see not just what the meta is right now. When you take a tournament setting that is the best of the best playing against the best of the best. And so this is what the games will look like a little bit ahead. It's like we were able to peer into the future a little bit. And I understand the tournament format is a little bit different, but um, that is going to be more representative of the meta than just going on ladder and you still have weekend warriors popping on and just trying to force Quillboars no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and we'll hopefully get one of these BG experts to come on to the Lightforge in the next couple weeks, and especially because not just the meta is still developing. Quillboars came in on Tuesday, but the meta is at least changing slightly again with this patch coming next week. So not sure what exactly is going to happen, but definitely some things are going to impact Quillboars. And if you're thinking about this from an arena perspective, they're going to buff some cards. They're going to nerf some cards. The 1/4 Murloc Crab Rider is basically confirmed to be nerfed. Not that that's a huge problem in the arena anyway, but other cards may be buffed. I mean, other cards will be buffed, and some of those could become like arena contenders, right? Like that are currently seeing no or limited play, or they're seeing play right now and they're going to get buffed to be ridiculous levels, and you're going to hate the game afterwards. Who knows? We'll talk more about that next week once the buffs come in, assuming they have any significant impact in arena, which they also might not. Could just be a bunch of legendaries that no one cares about. All right. Let's go on to question from the GOAT to end this. I want to first give a big shout out to all of our patrons. You guys really help keep the Lightforge going. Thank you guys for all of your support. Our top patrons for the month: RV Night Train, Eric L, Yin, 15 Gold Cringe, Aaron LS, Aaron Greenberg, Dan F, Doug A, and Karova. Thank you guys so much for your support. And question from the GOAT. We talked about Pokemon Snap last week. How are you enjoying Pokemon Snap?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's so good. If you guys haven't gotten it, hashtag not sponsored. But if you guys, oh my god, can you imagine if we were sponsored by Pokemon? That would be.
No, I actually can't imagine. It would
I
blow my
imagine.
mind. I will quit my job tomorrow to be sponsored by Pokemon.
Right? I mean, okay. It's just a fantastic game because they quickly, whoever made it, really understood what people liked about the first game, and it's easy to just say like, oh, okay, so they just made a better version of the first game, but you could tell whoever made it like understood it to such a high degree. And then in terms of the interactions of the Pokemon, the pacing of the game, right? And this is a game in which some people will hate the pacing. It's just inevitable. Like you see a lot of the bad reviews on Metacritic, and it's just like too slow. I didn't like this pacing.
The point is to explore. Like the pacing
Right.
should be slow. Like games that are all about exploring. Like I'm thinking of like Outer Wilds, which got great ratings. That's a slow game. Why? Because you're supposed to be exploring. Other kinds of these like puzzle platforming whatever games, they're all slow. But you're supposed to be exploring. Anything with an exploration element is supposed to slow you down, right? Like how fast was Mist? But people aren't looking at Pokemon Snap, the reviewers at least, not necessarily all through this lens of, oh, you're like exploring, probably because it's on rails. And
Yeah, so it eliminates even the illusion of you
right.
exploring.
Except
right.
you are exploring. You're exploring by moving your camera around, which is the entire mechanic of the game, and being able to see things. You can't see everything on the first exploration route. You can't even see half the stuff. You can't even see a third of the stuff. Right? Not only do the stuff not appear until you do certain things, it's like a giant puzzle, really, with like riddles and hints through like their side quest system, which admittedly needs a little work. But after beating the game, I really got into the side quest system. I'm trying to knock each of them out without looking at any spoilers or cheating or guides online, and it's been like a freaking like I mean, it's been very fun and interesting. But you are like really challenged to be able to find all of them out if you don't like just go online and cheat yourself out of the experience, right? But even on the first route the first time, you can only look in one direction at any time. And the thing with being on rails is you can't stop. Or it's very hard to stop. You have to trigger certain conditions that'll make you stop, and you can only do it in very specific scenarios. But because you can't stop, you're going to go through the same area, I would say at least 3, if not 4 times, to just be able to see everything in that area without the new stuff that pops on every few times that you do a route. So the pacing does not have a problem with this game for an exploration game. It does have a problem if you're treating this like a normal game, like a non-exploration game. But if you treat it like a puzzle game, for example, or an exploration game, then you're in the right genre. And then you just have to kind of accept the fact that really FPS skills are kind of important for some of the trickier stuff in the game.
They really are. Some of the pictures that you kind of need, it's literally split second. And so for the first time around, you might not even see it. The second time around, you saw it, but you didn't take a picture of it because it was super fast. The third time, you like knew that it's there, but you like didn't have it pointed at the right spot, so you didn't get a good picture. So it like takes many times, and for you to like, okay, no, all right, it's coming up, it's here, it's gonna happen in a second. Like I was gonna say, like where like something swoops in, and literally it's something like swoops in, and then in order for you to get the perfect shot. So
Yeah.
yeah, it requires many playthroughs, and it's not everyone's cup of tea. Not
Hmm.
everyone likes it, but they did a really good job of injecting personality, and it just makes a lot of sense. Like, of course, this is what spoilers, but not really spoilers, like Tyranitar would do in this setting, right?
Hmm.
Like you think of Tyranitar and he's like really powerful, he's really grumpy, he's just angry all the time. So how would he react to other Pokemon in his territory? He's probably going to be really pissy. So it's just really good. You see the playfulness, you see the kind of interactions that you're able to do with these Pokemon because you're able to like play a song, you're able to throw stuff, and there's some special interactions. Like if you throw an apple at a Pokemon, it has like a different interaction than what you expect. But you think about it and you're like, oh, okay, this makes a lot of sense. Or if you do the radar thing, it has special interactions with certain Pokemon, and you're just like, oh yeah, of course. Like with this Pokemon, if I do the radar, it's gonna be different than just
Yeah.
some other Pokemon.
And coming from a background of I played the first game and then really didn't follow the franchise at all, and so I don't know like half the Pokemon at least in this game, it's still very intuitive. Like it's Pokemon design, you kind of know what the Pokemon does from just seeing it, right? And the animations are very good in this game. Like it's I don't think they did anything special. They're just very very consistent with high quality animations, and it all kind of works together so that I'm never bored of what I am looking at, even if I've done the route many times before. And whenever I figure out, because it's a puzzle, like when you get to the real end game, it's a puzzle. There's nothing else going on with this because you need to find the special 4-star interactions, many of which you have to set up. And they give you a little like hints on how to set it up. They're like, I wonder what this Pokemon does if this happens. And you're like, I can't make that happen. And then you're like, crap, I have to figure out how to make that happen. And then what Pokemon do I need to make that happen? How do I get them in the same area? How do I trigger them to do whatever? Some of these have like 5 or 6 steps associated with like one side quest. And like when you get it done, which you would basically do an entire route just for one side quest, and you won't be able to do that much else. There's always little side things you can do, right? Like you didn't get a diamond quality picture of like, I don't know, just a Pokemon, a particular Pokemon. I'm gonna just spoil a Pokemon in there, like let's say a Pichu. You didn't get a regular picture of a Pichu that fit the 4,000 points that required Diamond. Yeah, you can go and get that on your route. But other than those easy things, you're going to have to focus your route on dealing with this side quest that takes like half the route to like set up in this like intricate pattern that they don't really tell you how, but you can backwards like figure it out based on their hints. Like, that's actually really interesting to me. And it really gets you into the mind of like game designers and how this game is like set up. And every time you see the actual interaction play out, for so many of these, there is a story, there is a narrative to these like non-talking Pokemon things, and it's like Wild Safari, and just watching animals kind of do their thing, but like really cool and well animated things for the side quest ones. Like I have very rarely gotten a 4-star picture and been like, oh, that's it. Every time that I managed to make something happen to and every single Pokemon is a 4-star picture, if not multiple 4-star picture animations. Every time I got one to trigger, I'm like, oh damn, that was cool. And sometimes they just happen, right? For some Pokemon, you get the 4 stars. It just you can't miss it. Like it just kind of happens on the side of your screen. You're like, oh damn, that was awesome. Other ones you have to set up entirely. And there's over 200 Pokemon. I have not gotten I think I've gotten more than half of the 4-star interactions by now, but I'm still like meticulously digging through and like completing it. So I'm very satisfied with the game, and definitely has enough content to like carry that $60 tag.
It's very good. Okay, that's it. You guys should definitely go out and get it. The negative reviews I understand, and this is just something you have to evaluate yourself, and see.
But yeah, and that's the thing. Do you like puzzle games that are not like conventional, like pure logic or math puzzle games, like wider range puzzle games, and or do you like exploration games? Or do you like Pokemon? If the answer to any of those is yes, then you should get this game. You don't need to have the answer for all of them to be yes. If you're like, oh, I'm like a card, a TCG player. I like numbers. I like attacking things with cards, and I like planning out like big strategy and things. Like that's not gonna be that much of it in this game. Or if you're like, I like first person shooter action games. It's gonna be a little bit of first person shooting here, but a lot of it is gonna be a puzzle strategy kind of strategy, more puzzle than strategy, and exploration game. So I think I agree it's not for everyone, but I think it's for more people than they think, especially if they haven't played the first game.
Definitely agree with that.
All right, well, that's it for this Lightforge. Until next week, this is Adwicta.
This is Merp. See you guys.
All right.
Okay. Be right back.
Okay. Go die.
Send me the thing.
Yep, I'll send you the thing. I'll make the thing and send you the thing.